In this tutorial, I'll be transforming this landscape photograph using Lightroom Classic and turning it into this much more atmospheric image. I'll go through each adjustment panel step by step, providing detailed explanations as we go, with hints and tips for every adjustment. The purpose of my creative post-processing approach is to recreate in a two-dimensional photo what I visualized in my mind's eye when I captured the photo. And for this type of processing, I've opted for a lower saturation, faded look to achieve that creative effect. To make things easier for you, I've divided the video into chapters, and you'll find those chapter links in the description below. Anyway, for this slightly faded, low saturation, atmospheric look, I process my images in a very specific order, a kind of formula if you like, which starts with the lens corrections panel. And on this particular image, a linear gradient to darken that sky, and I'll show you how to very simply but effectively get rid of those annoying artifacts when creating intricate selections. Then the basics panel, and I do something here that you won't be expecting. And the colour mixer, more specifically the old HSL sliders, and why I don't use the new point colour functionality that everyone was talking about when Adobe released it not so long ago. The calibration tool, with one aspect of this tool that you really don't want to miss. And then the tone curve, where you'll see the image really come to life, and in a way that can only be achieved with the tone curve. Then colour grading for some refinements, and a radial filter to help draw the eye into the photo and onto the subject area of the image. And finally applying those seemingly endless final tweaks to get the image just right. And all of that guarantees perfect post-processing for this type of image every time. A repeatable process that acts as a kind of formula but tailored precisely to your unique image. And as you can see, you don't need to go to spectacular mountain ranges in faraway places to get your shot. This very mundane photo that anyone can take, and you'll probably have something similar in your own archive right now, has been transformed by the process that you're about to see. So I really hope that you get something from this video and that you can incorporate some of these techniques into your own post-processing techniques and workflow. And if you do get any value out of this video, then don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so that you don't miss any of my future videos. And so, after all of that, let's just get on with this. So the first thing I want to do with this image is to come up to my lens corrections panel and open that up. And in this panel, I'm looking at those two options at the top there, the first one being remove chromatic aberration. And if I just come into my image at 100% there, and that will zoom into the center of the image, you'll see that there's no color fringing on the edges of those branches. But if I come up to the top left, you will see significant color fringing on the edges of all of those branches. So you've got blue on the left hand side and red on the right hand side. And when I click on the remove chromatic aberration tick box, you will see it instantly disappears. So that's off and that's on. And what that tick box will do is to remove any and all of the color fringing that you get throughout the image, regardless of whether you think it's there or not. And it doesn't do any damage to any other parts of the image. So I always tick that tick box by default for every single image that I process. Okay, let's just zoom out there and fit on screen. So I've now got enable profile corrections underneath that, and for most of my images I leave that unticked, because what enable profile corrections tries to do is to correct any distortion that's inherent in the lens that you use to take the photo. And it does that by using a profile that exists within Lightroom itself, and Lightroom has a profile for pretty much every commercially available lens for pretty much every camera manufacturer that there is. So it's got a lot of these profiles, and it matches that up to the lens that you use to take the photo, and it attempts to remove any distortion. But if I can't see any distortion in my image, then I don't tick that tick box. And if I can see some distortion in that image, but I don't mind it and it doesn't jar with me, then again I don't tick that tick box, because I don't see the point of fixing something that I don't think is broken. So I'm just going to shut that down. And now what I want to do, before I go on to my adjustment panels here, starting from the basics panel downwards. What I first want to do is to even up some of that exposure difference in the image. I've got a very dark foreground there and I've got a very bright sky at the top, and I want to introduce some darkening at the top of that sky, and I'm going to use a linear gradient, and that will darken the top of that sky and then fade it slowly down to the center of the image, which is the area where I want the viewer's eye to be drawn to when viewing the image for the first time. So that's what we'll be doing. And to apply a linear gradient, I need to open up my masking panel, which is that little circular icon on the end of that row of 5 icons there. So just click on that, and that opens up my dialog box for my masks on the right hand side. And I've got those 3 big masks at the top. They are my artificial intelligence masks, if you like. And this one on the left will look at the image and choose what it thinks is the subject. And then the same with the sky, and the same at the end with the background. So what I want to do is to select the sky, but I don't want to use the AI algorithm on this occasion because it won't be clever enough to sort out that sky from the branches, and it makes a lot of mistakes and you have to go in and correct them. So I may as well go in and do this manually, which is very quick and easy, and I'll do that by applying a linear gradient. So I'll just come down here and click that. And so what that's done, it's put my linear gradient dialog box on the right hand side, and then it's introduced this masking panel here, which I'm just going to drag down here to the bottom left of the screen here for my convenience. And in that masking panel, you can see it's created a new mask, and inside that new mask is my linear gradient, which I've just applied. So with my cursor over the top of the image there, I'm just going to left click and drag that linear gradient down. And you can see it stretching out, and I can go into that middle section, grab that handle and move it around as I see fit. I'm just going to leave it there. And that bottom section defines the amount of feathering, so I can push that up and sort of concertina that up, drag it back down again. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. So the red signifies the amount of image that is selected. And now I can come over to my linear gradient dialog box and just hover over the exposure slider and drag that to the left to darken the image. And you can see the top of that sky getting darker. And I'm not going to overdo it. I'm just going to leave it there. You can always come back to these adjustments later if you want to. Maybe just a little more. That'll do. So that's really darkened that sky at the top. It's brought out a lot of sky detail as well, and it fades down to the middle to help draw the eye into that center section there where the track ends. So that's a very dramatic effect, and it really rebalances the image. But what I've now got is that linear gradient, and that exposure reduction has also included the branches in the top left corner there. So I've got those very dark clump of branches at the top left that contrasts badly, I think, with the lighter branches down in the middle section of that image. So what I want to do now is to lighten those branches, to remove some of that linear gradient selection from those branches, but not the sky. And to do that is very easy. I hover over my linear gradient tool there in the masking panel, and I get these 2 little icons on the right hand side, those 3 dots and that eye symbol. If I click on that eye symbol, actually you'll just get a before and after, so you can see the dramatic effect, and you can also see the darkening effect of those trees there, those branches on the top left. But here to the left of that, I've got these 3 dots, and if I click on that, that will give me a context aware menu, and in that context aware menu I've got intersect mask with, and I hover over that and I get a load of masks that I can intersect this linear mask with. So down at the bottom there you can see the luminance range, and that's the one that I'm going to intersect this linear gradient mask with. And that places that luminance range mask on top of this little stack of masks now. And I've got linear gradient at the bottom. And I've got that little symbol there, which signifies that the luminance range mask is intersected with the linear gradient. And I've got my dialog box on the right hand side. So what the luminance range mask or selection does, it selects pixels of different luminosity values, which I choose. And by default, it selects all luminosity values from pure black to pure white. And that is depicted up here in this slider here. And if I just click that slider, you will see it gives me that grayscale scale, if you like, with the pure black on the left and pure white on the right. And those little handles on the left and right of that range tells me what range of luminosity values are selected. I've got everything selected from pure black to pure white. And as this is intersected with the linear gradient, this will only affect affect the area of the linear gradient selection. So what I want to do is remove some of the darkest pixels there. I want to deselect the darkest pixels, which are the pixels inside those dark branches. So I drag that handle from left to right, removing the selection of the darkest pixels in that luminosity range. And as you can see on the left hand side there at the top, you can see that the branches are getting lighter. And if I just stop that there, so now you've got that range here that has selected luminosity values from pure white to sort of mid grey, and in the image you can see that the branches have got lighter. But if I zoom in, you can see that there is no feathering between the selected areas and deselected areas. So I've deselected the areas inside those branches and they've got much lighter, and the sky is still nice and dark, which is what I want, but the area between them is not feathered. So I come back to my luminance range, grab that handle on the left hand edge there, and I will drag that towards the darker side of that range. And what it will do is to feather out the effect of that luminance range. So I've now got a nice feathering effect, and you just get something that you feel is right. So the closer that handle is to the edge of that range there, the worse the image looks, and the more feathering that I apply, the better the image looks. And then I leave that there, so I've got a nice amount of feathering, but I come back to the actual range itself and I can adjust that, and if I drag that to the right, it lightens that area inside those branches, and if I drag it to the left, it includes more of those darker pixels and therefore darkens the branches there. So I want something that it's purely to personal taste, and in this occasion this is a combination of parameters, if you like, between that range, that feathering effect, and then the exposure change in the mask itself. So those three combined, when you get that right, you get the look that you want. So if I zoom out now, fit that on the screen, and I come down to my luminance range mask there, and I click on that eye symbol, you see that before I applied the luminance range, after I applied the luminance range, and there is a significant difference there, and it's much more pleasing on the eye and jars with me much less. So that's it for the luminance range. I can now go into making my adjustments in those adjustments panels, starting from the basics panel. So I just shut down my masking panel here, and now I can start working my way through these panels. And I'm going to start with the basics panels. I'm going to open that up. And what you get when you open up the basics panel, you've got three main areas there. The first one being the white balance at the top. Then you've got the tone settings, and then the presence settings. I don't change the white balance settings at this stage. I just use the as shot choice that you can see there, and I leave it at that because that usually gives me quite a neutral image. And at the very end of post-processing the image, if I want to change the white balance, I will do it then. If I want to make the image warmer or cooler or whatever, I'll use the white balance then. But right now I'm just going to change the tone and presence settings, and the first thing I do, which you may feel is a bit unusual, but the first thing I do is I just click on the auto button. And the auto button doesn't affect the white balance, it only affects tone and presence. And what it does is an absolutely brilliant job of creating a very neutral image that is much more in line with maybe what you would have seen when you took the image at the scene itself. And it always does a really good job, and it's done a very good job here too. So it's opened up some of those shadows. I've got a lot more detail in the photo. I've got those greens, what looks like magentas, sort of browny magentas, and then greens in the branches at the top, in the foliage, and so on and so on. So I'm going to leave that there for now because I am going to come back and I'll refine the basics panel later. But what the two main adjustments I want to make at the start of this, because I want that kind of classic faded look for this image, I'm going to just take the contrast down to between -20 and -40, and just something to my taste, and leave that there. And again, with the vibrant slider, I'm going to reduce the saturation using the vibrant slider, and again to somewhere between -20 and -40. So what that's done is to kind of soften the image and neutralize it a bit more. Those colors are not so intense, not so distracting, but there's still a lot of work to do with this. But that is all I'm going to do with the basics panel for now, and I will come back to that and refine these adjustments later. But now what I want to do is to just shut down the basics panel, and I'm going to come into the color mixer next, and I'm going to start tweaking the hues of these various colors in the image, and I'm going to warm it up and so on. And that's what I'm going to do with the color mixer, and after that the calibration tool, because the two are linked and we'll be explaining that as we go. So I'm just going to open up that color mixer panel there. And what you get here are two panels. One is the mixer panel, which is open, and the other is the point color panel. And what point color does, it's kind of the mixer panel but on steroids, and it gives you a very fine grain control over the hues, saturation and luminosity of all the color groups in this image. And it's far too fine grain for what we want with this image. So I'm going to stay with the mixer panel. And that is the classic HSL panel that we used to have with Lightroom, and that splits the image up into 8 color groups from red to magenta, and they are 8 color groups that are visible in the image, and we can change the hues of those color groups, the saturation and the luminance of those color groups. So I've got hue selected at the moment, and all my sliders are set to 0. And so let's take the red color group first. So that is set to 0, and that means that Lightroom has got the red group of colors set to what it thinks that group of colors should be. But by sliding this slider to the left, I can remap how Lightroom sees red to something closer to magenta. And if I take that to the right, I remap red to something closer to orange, as you can see. And that hasn't made any visible difference to the image, and that means that there isn't very much visible red in the image. And then I do the same with the orange, and I remap that to something closer to red, and I take that to the right and I remap it to something closer to yellow, and so on. And I keep doing this, and that hasn't made much difference either. And I do it with the yellow channel, and I remap yellow to something closer to orange, and you can see that that's getting a lot redder. So that's kind of warmed all of those colors up. So there's a lot of yellow in this image, and I take that to the right to remap yellow to something closer to green, and that goes very green and cold. So let's just take this one into the minus section, not too far, but just warm things up a bit, because that's what I want to do with this photo. So that will do for that. Now I start on with the greens, and I remap green to something closer to yellow. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to reduce the intensity of that green grass in the bottom at the center of that image, and that has taken all that intense green out and kind of warmed it up, which is what I want. And if I go the other way and remap green to something closer to aqua, you can see that intense horrible color, which I do not want. So I'm going to take greens down to something much warmer, something like that. So I've got a much softer green now in that green grass, and I move on to aqua. So remap aqua to something closer to green, and I don't see any difference there. Remap aqua to something closer to blue, and I don't see any difference. And with the blue slider, take it to the left, and you can see that that blue is changed to a sort of I don't know, a greeny, more green is that? I'm not sure. Take that over to the right, and that is more purple, and I don't want any of those. Let's double click that, get that back to 0, and we'll do the same with purple. Don't see any difference there. Don't see any difference there. Double click that. And again with magenta, you sort of would have thought that there would be some magenta in here, but that's not making any difference. So the color that I originally saw looked magenta to me, but there's no actual magenta color group in there. So what we've got a lot of yellow, a lot of green, and a lot of blue. We don't want to change the blue, but we've changed the hue of the yellows and greens and created something a little bit warmer. And if we just toggle that eye symbol there for the color mixer to temporarily remove the effects of that, you've got a warming up. So it's a bit redder, a bit less green, and nice and warm. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there, and again we can come back and tweak these if we need to later on, but I'm just going to go on to saturation, and we'll just whiz through these because we know there's no red or orange. We'll just have a look at yellow, and that takes a lot of saturation out of the image, and that adds a lot of saturation. Let's just take a little bit out. So a tiny weeny smidgen of yellow, remove that, and then we'll go on to saturation for the greens. And we'll remove saturation. It all gets a little bit muddy when you remove the greens, because we know that there are a lot of green in there. We know that there is a lot of green in there. And that's a little too intense, but not too bad. I think we'll leave that somewhere in the positives there. And then we know no aqua, but blue. What I think I want to do is take out some of that blue and make it more grey, which we've got there. If we go all the way up, we've got a lot of blue. I don't want that. So let's just take it down a little bit and make that a little bit grayer. And then we go on to luminance. Again, no red, no orange, and darken those yellows. Lightening those yellows doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but I'll just stay on the positive there because it does bring out a few little details there in the yellows. Same with the greens, and that really makes that grass down the bottom look muddy and ill-defined, and that's a little too much, but I like the definition there. I'll just settle around there, about 25. Okay, no aquas, blues. I don't want to use these color channels to change the luminosity of the blue, so I'll double click that and leave that alone. Right, so that is the hue, saturation and luminance completed in the color mixer. So that's changed the values of those actual visible color groups, if you like. So we just click on the eye symbol. So much cooler, much warmer. And now we're going to do something similar with the calibration tool, and I'll explain more about that in a second. Let's just collapse this color mixer panel and open up the calibration tool. And what you're presented with are another set of sliders, this time 3 groups of sliders relating to each color channel. So red primary, green primary and blue primary. And then you've got the shadows slider at the top, which is concerned with the tint. So that's magenta and greens. So I don't normally have much to do with this slider, but let's just take it all the way to the left. And that's not a bad look, actually. It's quite a subtle effect. And then we go into the magentas over here, similar to the tint slider in the white balance. Okay, so what this tool does is every single pixel is made up of a combination of a red channel value, green channel value and blue channel value. And each of those values can be anything from 0 to 255. And then you get a combination of those 3 color channels creates a final color for each pixel. So what these primary sliders do for the red, green and blue channels is that it changes that value in every single pixel. So it's global rather than local, which is what the color mixer is. So the color mixer has those 8 visible color groups. This doesn't care if a particular color is visible or not. It just changes that red primary value or that green primary value or that blue primary value. And the best thing to do is just to get on with it and start sliding these sliders. Okay, so I know that we start off with the red primary channel there, and we just go to the left and see what happens. And that kind of, I don't know, remove some color, cools it down, go the other way, and you've got a general warming up. So it's quite a nice little look there, and I think we want something on the positive side, and so we go with plus 38, 39 or whatever, 37. Okay, on to the saturation now. So we can change every single red channel in every single pixel in terms of its saturation. Don't want that. And that's quite nice, but too much. So again, somewhere in the positive. Now we just do the same with the green channel. And because I want to warm things up, I want to dampen down the intense color, like in that green. I want that general warming. I'm trying to do the same thing with calibration as I did with the color mixer. So I don't want too much of a change here. Saturation in that green primary channel. And that's getting too much. Let's come back down. Okay, so I'll leave that there. So the thing is with these sliders, it doesn't matter how much experience you have with them. It doesn't matter if you've processed 1 million pictures in the most perfect way possible. When you're processing an image for the first time, you still don't really know what that slider is going to do to your image until you slide it. And so to get the big effect, if you like, for each slider, you have to go right to the end of the slider to get that big effect. And then you know exactly what it does. You know how it's interacting with your unique image. And then you can dial it down and get something that you like. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. So the blue primary channel, that hue slider, is absolutely brilliant. I love that red. Not in this image, but I love the way that it turns green into red, and it does a really good job of that. And when you want to, if you've got a forest scene and you just want to warm it up, take some of that intense green out, add a bit of that blue, slide that blue hue slider to the left, and you'll dig out a lot of kind of color variations and so on. So it's a great slider, that blue primary slider. And then the saturation with this blue primary sometimes has the effect, kind of visual effect of brightening things up a bit. I don't know why. Not so much in this image. So it's really just saturation there. And I think something in the positive there, that'll do. So let's come up to the eye symbol for that calibration tool. And that's what I had. And that was already warming up slightly what I started off with, and then that's what the calibration tool has given me, and I'm very happy with that, because now we've done this, we are now going to go on to the tone curve, and the tone curve really gives my image a pop. It will create the fade effect, but it will also add a color cast, and it will also adjust the contrast, and it will really make the photograph pop in a way that it doesn't at the moment. So let's just shut down the calibration tool. And so I'm just going to open up that tone curve there, and there it is in all of its glory. And what you're presented with in this dialog box is the tone curve, which is a straight line by default. And at the top here I've got these 5 little icons, and each one of these 5 icons is a separate independent tone curve. The 2 on the left, which are depicted in grey, they change the luminosity values of the image, so that would be the red, green and blue channels in equal amounts, therefore lightness and darkness and so on. That's the 2 grey icons on the left, and then we've got the red icon here, and that's red channel only, and then green channel only, and then blue channel only. So if we just click on this second one in, which is the point curve, this one is controlled by control points, and you start off by default with a black point control point and a white point control point, and when you only have 2 points on the line, they get joined by a straight line. But as soon as you introduce a third control point, which I can do by left clicking, you drag that down to lower those values, and it darkens the image, and you get that curve. And then you increase that, and it increases the values that you started off with, and it lightens the image. So if I just double click that, and if you come down here to where the darker pixel values are in the image, you lower it to darken those pixels, you get your curve, but then you come up where the lighter pixels are and you increase that, and you get a little, what is called an S curve, that increases contrast that you can see here. So I'm just going to shut that down by double clicking on those control points to get rid of them. And now we can do the same with each of these color channel curves. So I'm on the red channel tone curve now, and if I reduce red in each of those pixels, it increases the prominence of green. And if I increase red over here in the lighter part of the curve, it increases red. So you can see that in the sky there. And then I do that same thing, that little S curve for the green channel. And what you can see is how deep and rich those colors are. And you can see the image transforming. If I do the final one here, the blue channel, and then you get something that you like the look of. So that's just something that I've instantly done. It takes forever to refine these curves. That's the thing about curves. You don't need much experience in it. If you've got 10 years experience or one day, you're still going to be fiddling around with these things to get something that you like. But once you get something you like that works for the image, it will transform that image, and then you save it as a preset. So what I've done with my preset, which I'll show you in a minute, I've created a little S curve for each one of these, and that is set over here in my presets panel over here. If I open that panel up, I get my TE tone curve 1, and when I hover over that, you can see the change that it's made. And so once I got that look for my images, which really works well for cloudy images, and it doesn't matter if it's summer or winter, but cloudy images it works best on, you get that incredible look. I love the richness of that and how the colors have come out. So I worked it out, took me ages to do that. I then saved it as a preset. Now I just add it every time I want to apply that preset. And that's what I've done there, and now it's permanently applied to my image. And now what I can do is go into my luminosity curves, starting with my point curve, and I want to create that faded effect. And that faded effect is created really simply by taking the black point here and remapping, move that control point from 0. It starts off in the bottom left corner at 0, and you move it up to a higher value, and you can see that it's dug out all those shadows and created a slightly misty sort of faded effect. And I do the same with the white point, but I make the white point a little bit darker rather than lighter, and that just does the same thing. Now I've got a really pleasing faded look. And now I've got the final curve here out of those 5 curves that I haven't yet made any adjustments to. And this is another one of those adjustments that I leave right until the end, because then I really know what I still need to do with the image. And the parametric curve, I will do exactly that. I'm going to leave it for now and come back to it a bit later to make my final tweaks. But let's just click on that eye symbol for the tone curve. And you can see that's what I started with after my calibration tool changes. And that's what I've got after my tone curve changes. And you can see the richness. And I've got my cold look back, but I still got that heat in the grass and in that foliage. So let's just shut that down. And the next thing that I want to do is to have a look at the color grading, because color grading now allows me to correct anything that I didn't like with the tone curve. Because I use a preset for my tone curves, maybe it's a bit too blue now. So I can now go into color grading and just heat some of that stuff up a bit. And let's open up that color grading panel there. And there it is. And what you get presented with are these 3 color wheels representing midtone, shadows and highlights. But I don't want to make my adjustments using that panel. I want to go into each of these color wheels independently. So I'm going to choose the highlight color wheel first. And I don't actually make my adjustments on this color wheel, which you can do, but I open up this little menu here, this little triangle here. If you toggle that, that will open up the menu where you get access to the hue, saturation and luminance sliders, and that's where I prefer to make my adjustments. Okay, so what I'm going to do here with this is quite cool now. So I've got very cold, if you like, highlights. So the bright highlights in that central area where the sky is lightest is quite cold, and I just want to heat that up. So what I do with this color grading tool, I take the saturation all the way up to the top, plus 100, and then I apply the hue. So in this case, I want to warm those highlights up. So I go all the way up to green, and then I drag that to the left to go into the yellows, and then I go into the reds, and then eventually you go too far. So that's too far. So when you go back to the greens, you go into the yellows, and you want, well, for me, I want that sort of little bit of fire in the sky. So I want it a kind of orange yellow. So that's what I've got there. And then I reduce my saturation to get the look that I want. So all I'm doing really is I want to get rid of some of that heat. So that's no saturation, so that's no change. And then I go up to something where I can see a significant change. And then I come back down, and then I go back up. So that is taking the edge off of that coldness in the brightness of that sky. So if I symbol that, so that's a tiny change, but it is a change. So that's off. And that's blue, and that is on, that's orange in the sky. So off, very cold in the sky, and when it's applied I get a little warmer sky there. And now I'm going to do the same with the midtones, and I don't know what's going to happen with these midtones, but again, increase saturation to 100. So do I want cold midtones or warm midtones? Let's just have a look. So that's a shade of blue I like. Let's bring that saturation down, and I don't really want to make too big a change in the midtones. Let's just take that down, warm that up. I don't think I want the midtones warm, so I'm going to go back up to cool, and I'm going to drag that saturation down. Now, do I want it 0? In other words, no effect? I think I'll just have a teeny weeny bit there. Okay, so that's the midtones. Now the shadows. Right, so when you've got a landscape image, And I think the reason why I prefer to have a slightly warmer sky where the sky is bright, like as in this image, where those clouds are now a little bit warmer, is because where you get sunshine and sunlight, you get heat, and where you get shadows, you don't get heat. So it's kind of cooler in the shadows, warmer in the highlights. So I always tend to have cool shadows and warmer highlights. So I'm going to take this saturation right up to 100 for the shadows, and then I'm pretty sure that I'm going to want to cool down those shadows a tiny weeny bit. So let's drag that saturation down, and that's too much still, and let's go down to 0. So that's, do I want to change that? So I think I'll just have a tiny bit there, go back into highlights, and just, do I want a bit more there? Oh, sorry, not the hue. Do I want a bit more saturation? I think I'll leave that there. That's quite a lot. Let's eye symbol that. I quite like that, so I'm going to leave that there. There's two final sliders here. One's blending, one's balance, and we're blending. If you view the image in color grading terms, that the image is split into thirds, so highlights, shadows, and midtones. The blending between them can be sharp or blended or feathered, and that's what this blending slider does. But basically, again, you're just going from one extreme to the other to see what difference it makes. So going to the right warms it up. And I like a slight warming of this image, so I'm going to have that in the positive there. And the balance is, again, the image is split into thirds, shadows, highlights, and midtones. And the balance tells Lightroom how much of the image constitutes highlights, how much midtones, how much shadows. So if I go to the right there, you can see it warms up, and that's because most of my image is now viewed by Lightroom to be highlights. So that's crept into the shadows as well, and that's way too much. I'm just going to keep that down there in the center. Plus 10 will do, or maybe even double click that, get 0. Yeah, I think I'll leave that there. Right, so let's just eye symbol that. Okay, so the biggest change is that warming up of the highlights. And so now I'm just going to shut that color grading down. I'm happy with that. So the next things that I want to do is maybe add a vignette, and then I'm going to add a radial gradient filter to highlight the central area where I want the eye to be drawn to, and then I'm going to brighten that up a bit to draw the eye into that area. But next, I think I'm going to apply a post-crop vignette. And that means opening the effects panel here. So just open that up, and I get post-crop vignetting, as you can see on my dialog box there. And if I take this to the right, it will lighten the image in the corners, which I don't want. If I want to take it to the left, and I'll take it way too far to the left, and then I want to change my other parameters here. So change your midpoint. Right, so that'll do for midpoint, and then the roundness. So I've got a rectangular shaped photo, so when roundness is at 0 in the middle, I get an oval shaped vignette. But I can turn it into a square, and I can turn it into a circle. But I'm going to keep it in the middle and have it as an oval like that. So next is feathering, and I like a lot of feathering in my vignettes, so that will do. I mean, if I go all the way down to the left, I get no feathering and you get the hard edge, but I want a lot of feathering. Right, so highlights will increase the brightness of areas around the edge of the frame that started off bright. So I'll just show you that. It's not something that I want for this image. Look at the top there. So that's had the biggest effect at the top because that's the brightest part of the image. And then we go back to dark. So they're my parameters. I'm quite happy with those. So the next thing I need to do is to reduce the amount. So that's not bad. Just click the eye symbol to get a before and after. So that's, I don't want anything too drastic. I just want something to help push the eye into the image. You could go a bit stronger there. So that will do for that. But now I've got a dark corner on the bottom right. Top left is a little bit dark, and the bottom left is a little bit dark. But I can make adjustments in those areas using the masking tool. And that's exactly where I'm going to go next, because I want to use the radial gradient filter to apply to the central part of that image near the bottom where the track ends. And I want to lighten that area to draw the viewer's eye into that. And then it will be final tweaks after that. So let's just close down the effects panel and go back up to my masking panel here, which is that circular icon on the end of that row of icons. and that opens up my dialog box on the right that you can see, and my masking panel is still over here bottom left that you can see. So now I'm going to create new mask. I'm going to use the Radial Gradient, and I'm just going to drag that out over my image, and I want to place it over the central area. And now I just want to brighten that area up. So that's the area depicted as red. I just increase my exposure in that area. And let's just bring that down. And you can just waggle this around a bit to see the effect that it has in other areas. But I want it somewhere over the road here, just right. And then do I want to stretch this out? And I think, why not? So this is mask 2. I can just hover over that, and there's my eye symbol there. That's what I had, and that is a lot better, I feel. So now I want to change, just increase the contrast in that central area a little bit, but I want to do that using a different mask. So I'm going to create another mask, another Radial Gradient over the same area, and then just put those two next to each other. And then I'm going to come down here on the right hand side, just tweak the dehaze, because dehaze is a kind of an alternative contrast, if you like, and I quite like it sometimes, so I'm just going to use that. Right, so that's brought out some of the richness there, and I do quite like that. And then if I symbol that, mask 3, that's what I had before with just the lightening effect, and now it's a bit crisper now. I've got that dehaze applied. And you can just come up to the other adjustments here and tweak the shadows and so on. So opening up those shadows a little bit, it's almost like you're allowing a little bit of sunlight that's coming in from a low point behind those clouds into that image there. It's just lightening it up a bit. And let's just stretch that out. Right, now another thing that I want to do, or before we go on to the next thing, one little bit of advice, and I've just noticed it myself. I've just glanced up at the navigator panel, at the little thumbnail that's in there, and that gives you a kind of an overview. Imagine if you're looking at something close up, which you are at the central image here, when you're editing. It's almost like sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees because you're so close and homed in on that main image. If you just glance across at that navigator image, you get a kind of bird's eye view of what you've done. And you get a kind of overall verdict, if you like, about whether the changes you made are good or bad or whatever. And so I'm quite liking that navigator picture, but I do need to lighten up those corners a bit. And the way I'm going to do that is to create a new mask. I'm going to use the brush tool, and that's open up my dialog box on the right for that brush. And I've got a new mask here, and inside of that I've got my new brush that I've just selected. So I'm going to come up to here. There's my brush dialog box, and here's my adjustment. So I'm going to increase the exposure to, let's say, two and a bit stops. That's way too much exposure for those corners, but I'm now going to reduce the flow. So I'm going to take my flow slider and take it all the way down to about 14%, and I'm going to take my brush over there, and I'm just going to brush over that area. And so that's going to apply the 2-stop increase in exposure, but only in 14% increments, which is defined by my flow. And that will slowly brighten that corner area up, but without over brightening, and it will give me fine grained control because my flow is so low, if you like. So if I go to my new mask, which is now mask 4, it's renamed it mask 4, and then click on the eye symbol, that's what I had before, and that's what I now have. And I can come in to this area in the bottom left, do the same. Any little dark area now, I can dig out the darkness and bring in some light. And that's what I'm doing in the top left now. And I think that's making an improvement. Let's eye symbol that mask 4. And you can see the difference that's made in those corners. And I'm going to leave that there for now. And all of these adjustments you can always come back later. Let's just a little bit more around that corner area. A little bit there, a little bit there. This is a problem where you start the fine grain changes at the end of processing an image, but I'm going to leave that there for now. So there's my panel, and I'm just going to get out of the masking panel. Just click on the masking icon. And now I've got two main areas where I want to tweak the image. One is the basics panel and one is that parametric curve in the tone curve. So next I think will be the basics panel. So let's just click on that. And now I can start refining these sliders a little bit more. So let's see, increase exposure a bit, which I think is good. Contrast. I'm quite happy with that contrast, how it was. Highlights. No, let's keep that down towards the left. Shadows. Open up these shadows a bit more. No. The whites in some images really make the image pop when you increase them. And it's not done a bad job there. At least down the bottom. But I'll leave that there. Less is more. Less is very often more. And then finally the blacks. And you get more of a faded effect when you move the black slider to the right. Okay, I don't want to mess around too much down here. Maybe the vibrance, take that down a little bit to dull down those yellows at the back there and at the end of that track. And now let's go back into that tone curve. And we've got the parametric curve set up there, look, and we can just tweak those sliders there. So we've got shadows, darks, lights and highlights, and it's just a case of seeing what works for the image, and you are in control. Okay, lots of little tweaks there. And I'm just going to come into the point curve, and what am I going to do here? Just highlight that black point there, and now I've got the input value and the output value. The input value is a value that that control point started off at, and it's been moved to 25, and I just want to move that a little bit, so I'm going to go in there and just use the cursor keys to increase that a little bit. Okay, that will do. So now I am very happy with this image, but the more I look at it, the more distracted I am by the darkening of the sky at the top there, and I just want to remove some of that darkening effect. So right at the very beginning of the photo, I applied that linear gradient and used that to darken that top section there. But now after all this post-processing in between, I think that sky is just a little bit too dark and I want to lighten that up a little bit. So I'm going to go back into my masking panel, just click on the mask icon, and I get my dialog box on the right hand side, my masking panel on the left hand side, and I want to go back to that original mask that I created that linear gradient in, and that is the mask 1 mask down the bottom there. I just left click that, and you get that little stack of selections there, the linear gradient that I originally applied with the luminance range on top. So I'm just going to select that linear gradient, and that puts the parameters, the adjustments on the right hand side there that you can see, and I'm just going to increase the exposure a little bit in that linear gradient. Okay, and I think that is an improvement. And again, you can tweak these settings forever and ever and ever, trying to get incremental improvements. But at some point, you've got to stop. So I am definitely going to stop there. But there was definitely something wrong there at the top. And I think I've made that a little bit better. So I'm just going to shut that mask down. And just quickly come into my basics panel and just explain about the white balance. So the white balance I haven't changed at all in the post-processing of the image, but I've used other methods of warming and cooling the image, as you've seen throughout the processing of the image. And at the beginning of processing this image, I said that I waited till the end before I made any adjustments to the white balance, but only if I saw fit. And so now's that time. Do I want to warm up or cool down the image, or do I want to change the tint? tint, and with that tint you can remove some of the green out of leaves, out of grass and so on, or you can take, there's quite a lot of magenta in the browns of the forest floor, and so that tint is often quite good to make adjustments to those parts of an image. But in this case I'm still not going to change the white balance settings in this. I'm happy with the original settings, the as shot settings, and so I'm going to leave it at that. So that really is the end of processing this image, and I'm really not going to make any more adjustments to it. This is the final version, and this is the version, or very close to what I saw in my mind's eye when I came across this scene. What makes any image is composition, and although this subject matter might be seen by some as boring or dull or mundane, it still has a visual effect because the composition is sound and strong. And that is what makes a photograph. The composition, not the subject matter. And that's why you don't need spectacular scenery to capture a stunning shot. You can apply these post-processing techniques to any of your images right now, and as long as they are compositionally sound and strong, you'll end up with something very striking. Anyway, a composition starts with what I call a moment of inspiration, which is a whole other subject beyond the scope of this video. But it's the very beginning of naturally and organically composing a photograph just like this one. And that's a process that I applied in order to take this photo. And that's why this apparently mundane shot works. And that's why I decided to post-process this photo and apply that faded lower saturation look. I wanted that atmospheric feeling, and that's what I think I got. And that really is it for this photograph. Now you can go do the same for your photos. And again, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, then please like this video, because that will make me and those pesky YouTube algorithms very happy. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, as well as press that notification bell so that you don't miss any new videos. And I promise they will not all be as long as this one.